So welcome back to my channel. This is Gamer Dom, and I thought it's been a while since I did any sort of newbie or beginner's guides on this channel, and I thought it's about time I rectified that. And one of the areas that's been sort of, I guess, painting's a bit strong, but concerning me a little bit is the number of players out who seem to be confused at the roles of different vehicles in the game. So there are 5 broad classes of tanks in World of Tanks. Obviously there are light tanks, medium tanks, heavy tanks, tank destroyers, and the dreaded sky cancers, the artillery. So, but within those classes of vehicles there are also various subclasses, and this is part of the problem, I think, within how people pick it up. So for those who have are very interested in military history or into tanks generally, will have a sort of implicit understanding the different types of vehicles and what their roles might be. Those who aren't necessarily more coming from a gaming background maybe might not. So this is really for those kind of guys, just to give you a little bit of a better understanding about these different vehicles. So we're going to start with the light tanks, because I think the light tanks, more than any other, are vehicles in the game that have had the biggest change in terms of their roles, and are probably the most misunderstood class of vehicles, in my humble opinion. Now, I come at this with a player, who doesn't profess to be the world's expert in the game. I just enjoy World of Tanks, and I play a lot of it. And it's sort of my observations, this is all my observations over time, and also my understanding of how, reality, these vehicles were used and are used to this day in terms of military doctrine. So we'll start with light vehicles. Now I'm going to start from tier 5 upwards. Reason for that is, under tier 5, so tiers 1 to 4, light tanks, and this is part of the problem I think with the classification, are not really light tanks. So if you look at, let's just pull up one of them. What have we got? There's a tier 2 light tank. Yeah, so something like this fella. So this is a light Vic, a tier 2 British light tank. It is effectively a main battle tank. Same with this thing. This is a a Swedish light tank. Now the problem is that, and this is where I think a lot of the confusion happens within vehicles, is that early war vehicles or interwar vehicles, tanks that were developed between the First World War and the Second World War, were expected to play the role of a battle tank, even though in terms of their armour and their speed and everything else, they were really light tanks. So this sort of vehicle has very thin armour. It's designed to survive on the battlefield through speed and stealth, not through firepower and going toe to toe with the heavies. And you see this in the early war vehicles and the interwar vehicles. Then there are also some really weird exceptions. So you get things like where is it here? The Valentine. Here we go. Valentine 2. Now this is in this variant, it's a Russian tier 4 light tank, but it's got more armor than most of its contemporaries that are, heavy tanks. So it's got 60 millimeters of armor, 65 on the turret. This thing will block shells. So although it's designated a light tank, it's actually more like a main battle tank. So that's the reason why I'm going to ignore tier 1s to 4, because really there's too much confusion over what their actual role is. So let's start with tier 5 and upwards. So this tier 5 American light tank, the Chaffee, is the archetypal light tank in many ways. And really there are two main doctrines in light tank play. There are the sneaky, hideaway, passive scouter type vehicles, which tend to rely on their great camo and their ability to remain hidden until the enemy get really close, and primarily, certainly in the early and possibly the mid game, their role is to passively spot and to basically create opportunities for the rest of the team to create damage. Now, their role, as I say, is not really damage dealers, and this is where the biggest challenge comes with light play. I have seen countless games, and I'm sure you all have too, where somebody in a light tank drives down to where all the heavy tanks are and tries to go toe to toe with the heavies. Now that is not a good idea. A tank like a Shafi, even when it's top tier, will struggle going toe to toe with mediums or heavy tanks, particularly heavy tanks, but medium tanks. It just does not have the firepower or the armor. I mean, look at this. We were just looking at a tier 4 tank that had 60 millimeters of armor, 65 millimeters. This Shafi has 25 millimeters of frontal armor and only 38 on the turret. It is not a tank that's designed to go toe to toe. This is actually an active scout. It's not even the best passive scout. It's okay, 38% stationary spotting range, but then I haven't got a fully pimped out camo crew on this yet. But then you go to something like, here we go, T92. This is an American tier 8 light tank. Now this has got largely pimped out crew, fully camo on 3 of the 4 crew members, also with a camo net and a camo on the tank itself. Gives me 42.59% concealment when stationary, which is pretty darn good. So this thing is very much a passive scout in my mind. This is the sort of vehicle that you hide in a bush. You get to a bush, you use its supreme mobility to get to a bush, hide if there's one available, and go passive. The Shafi and probably things like the T49, the WZ are more active scouts. So these guys are really, they're ones for running around the battlefield, using their speed and their size to make it hard to be hit and to deal with to do the spotting job for their team. Their secondary role is to take out the enemy light tanks, because if you can do that job, if you can do one of two things, well, in fact ideally if you can do two of two things, if you can spot the enemy tanks so we know where they are, and also take down the enemy light tanks so the enemy can't see where your tanks are, you will go a long way to winning this game, winning a game for your team. Now, and that's what it's all about. So a light tank is very much a support role. This thing, if you want to go balls deep, go for it in a big way, get into a snarl fest of tanks fighting it out, don't play a light tank. That would be my advice. Light tanks are a high skill cap vehicle. You need to know what you're doing. I played nearly 40,000 games in this thing, and I still don't consider myself a very good light tank player. I have good games in them, but I'm not a great light tank player. And you can see my win rates on these tanks varies considerably. Some of them 58%, which is rather nice, but others 46, 48, 48, 47. Even something like this WZ131, which I've got 2 marks of excellence on the barrel, I'm only managing a 50% break-even win rate. So, these things are tough to play, and I would always recommend for the newer players, avoid the light tanks, other than the ones you have to go through at the lower tiers. Stick to heavies, mediums, tank destroyers when you're starting out, because light tanks take a lot of getting used to. Once you know the mechanics of how the spotting works, how the camo works, then you can start to transition into playing light tank play. So the other class, sort of subclass if you like, of vehicles in light tank designated vehicles are the autoloaders. So these little buggers, now you get them in the French line, you get them in the American line. They have multi-shell guns loaded in a magazine. So this is the tier 9 French light tank. It has a here we go, oops, Wrong button. There we go. Come on, show me. There we go. It has a 90mm gun which has 4 shells in its magazine, which means it is a high intensive weapon when you get a chance to unload that 90mm gun. However, it's still not got the biggest penetration. This is a tier 9 vehicle going up against things like Mouse and other big ass tanks. It has 205 penetration, so you still need to get round flanks and rears. But this sort of vehicle really comes into its own more than any other in the mid to late game. So it's a pretty good spotter. 36% camo rating with this crew, which is pretty good. It's got good mobility, so it can whiz around, do the active scout role. But really where it comes to the end of the game, when it can pounce on dying and injured heavies and light tanks or medium tanks that are isolated, that's really where it comes into its own. Indeed, all light tanks do that. Once you get to that, once you've done your job of spotting the enemy, taking down the enemy light tanks ideally, then you get to sort of mid to late game and you see an opportunity. That's the key thing with these things. That's what takes you from having a reasonable game in a light tank to have an awesome game in a light tank, is that once you have the opportunity to use that mobility, use the speed which all light tanks come with, to pounce on isolated tank destroyers or isolated heavy tanks, or get in and clear out the enemy artillery. Now, it used to be that, I mean, World of Tanks used to operate almost like a rock paper scissors idea, that, you know, for every class of vehicle there was another one that counteracted it. And in the old days, light tanks' role was to counteract artillery. Now, with all the changing roles of light tanks and artillery, that's less the case now, but still they have an opportunity there. If a light tank can get into the rear of the enemy and find its artillery and take it down, that's another huge job you're doing for your team. Now, the one thing you should absolutely categorically never do in a light tank, well, it's 2 things you should never do in a light tank. One is suicidal scout. You see this so often. So many players think, I'm going to go off and scout the enemy, and they'll charge across the battlefield, they'll fly towards the enemy team, they'll, you know, spot half the enemy team, and they think they've done a fantastic job, but they'll die. The problem with it is that, yes, they've spotted all the enemy team, but have your team had the opportunity to fire at the spotted targets? There's absolutely no point in you spotting everything if your team can't take advantage of it. 2 ways they primarily take advantage of it. One, they see where the enemy are deploying. So on maps where, you know, I don't know, there's a hill and you scouting ahead spots that there's a line of heavy tanks going up the hill, means that gives your team you know, insight into what to expend. It means the artillery can start to target that area. It means your heavies can either decide, do we go up and face them, or do we wait down below and try and deal with them from below. That kind of thing is useful, but it's of less interest and less use to your team if you spot things and allow your tank destroyers, your medium tanks, to fire at distance and start doing damage on the enemy tanks. That's where your value is. So yeah, light tanks, don't suicide. The other thing you must never do with a light tank, in my mind, is never go toe to toe with heavies and mediums. This thing is a lightweight killer. It's a sneaky thing. You need to play dirty in a light tank. You don't want an even fight. If there's an opportunity to pounce on a wounded or a tracked tank destroyer, that's the time when you go in. You never fight in a fair fight. You never go face to face. You always try and flank, you always try and get the rear, you try and track enemy vehicles to make them stationary. That's your role. If you want to play a gentlemanly class of vehicle, don't play a light tank, would be my advice. Okay, so this is a great example of passive scouting. So we've got here a guy called Count TR, who's driving the outstanding Russian Tier 10 light tank, the T100 LT. Now, he's driving this thing, but you could be at any tier and do a similar thing. He's a Malinovka. He is going very aggressive. Look at this. He's lit up. tank after tank after tank. Wasn't spotted himself. He's used the natural camo of his own tank to basically light up, well, most of the enemy team there with those shots, with that initial spotting run. He's platooned up with two guys from his clan who are in ship barns. And see what he's doing here? He's reversing into this bush. He's just sitting in a bush. That's all he is doing. Already done 2,000 assistance damage. He doesn't carry a camo net, but this tank has extremely, and you can see he's just checking that he is well and truly covered from any possible spots. That WZ-131 is getting very close to him, and that's the one he's worried about. You can see he's asking for fire on that guy because he can't afford to him. Gets much closer, he's going to be in auto spot, and then the count is going to be down for the count. But luckily the WZ's obviously got 6th sense and keeps pulling back every time he gets spotted. Meanwhile, he is racking up the damage. Look at this, 5,000 assistance damage. Now I did see another game which I was going to feature where a guy did 18,000 spotting damage, but that was in a 30v30. This is a standard 15v15 game, and look at this, there goes his nemesis, 7,000 damage, and the enemy WZ is down, so that means he's got less chance of being spotted. Now he's just doing nothing clever here, just sitting in a bush watching the enemy team just getting spotted and wrecked. And if you do passive scouting, this is all you need to do, right? No more than this. You find yourself a good bush, get in it, make sure you're concealed, and just get your coffee, sit there, take it easy, and let your team carry the load. Let them do the work. It doesn't even have to be a huge amount of, you don't have to see an awful lot. It literally, measurement of spotting is from any part of your tank to any part of the enemy tank. So you just have to have a little bit sticking out the top of your tank, and that is it. And that's all he's doing here. I mean, most of the tanks that went down the 3 line were spotted by him, but he could barely see them. He certainly couldn't have shot them if he'd wanted to. So he's just sitting here, just 12,400 assistance so far. 12,000. This is a 15v15 tier 10 game. It's not the most energetic game, I'll give you that. But this is what you do when you're passive scouting. Now this is an extreme, right? And you don't always get maps that enable you to do this kind of thing. But the reality is, there's variants you can do of this. Find yourself a location and spot. Just spot. Nearly 13,000 assistance damage so far. His team are winning this 5-2. And he's still getting assistance damage. There's a Death Star there who's now lit up. Can anyone hit him? Oh yeah, can he just? 1,800 hits on that Death Star. All down to him. And remember, the beauty, this is why it's, for newer players, don't grasp it, why a scout is so invaluable. Because all this damage is being inflicted on the enemy team without them being able to respond. They can't see what's firing at them in most cases, and the thing is, the count is getting half the experience that he from the kills as he would get if he'd done it himself. So it's like he's done 7,500 damage at the moment because he's on 15,000 assistance. This has just been just an easy game for him. He's done nothing really other than just get in the bush and hold his nerve and don't fire. That's the other thing, you must never ever fire. I hate his camo on this tank, by the way. I thought I got historic only switched on. Now he's finally been spotted. It's taken all this time and he's finally been spotted, but he's spotted one artillery. Fired his first shot. Well, hey, he's fired a shot. Oh, but he got smacked by the GW. But it's not doing him any good. He's hit something. Leopard 1, I've no idea why Leopard 1 is hiding at the back there, but he's dead now. Now he's on rampage mode. 17,000 assistance damage. The enemy team has been wrecked with a capital R. Can he spot the other artillery? Oh yes, of course he can. And he just rams the object just for the fun of it and kills him as well. Easy as that. That's how you spot. So there you go. Of course that was an ace tanker. He got spotter badge, of course, because look at that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, all bar one of the enemy team he spotted, and he did damage on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Sorry, his team did damage on 12 of the 15 tanks due to his spotting. So of course he got spotting badge, of course he got scout badge, and of course he got patrol duty, and he aced the vehicle. Finished up, top of the team, only did 633 damage and 2 kills, 1299 base XP. And if you think you can't make money with it, look at this, 107,000 credits, because you're not paying anything out. There's no shells being expended, so it's all, and there's usually not an awful lot of damage either. Now he did use some consumables, so that cost him a lot of money, but he still made nearly 97, well, over 97,000 credits with some boosters running by the look of it. 17,711 spotting damage. Wow, nearly 18,000. Just ridiculous. And 3,041 assistance damage, XP for his crew. So that's how passive spotting works. You find yourself a decent bush, pull out the deck chairs, get out a good book, and just spot. Try not to get spotted, try not to resist the urge to fire, resist the urge to move. Just let the natural camo of the tank work to your favour, and hope that your team keep firing at them. That was a bit easier for him because he had a couple of platoon buddies in ship barns who were supporting him, and they had pretty good games in their own rights. Let's have a look. Yeah, look at this, 6,000 damage and 4,000 damage. So there's 10,000 between them. Of the 17,000 he did, pretty much guarantee most of that was his spotting that they got as well. So that's how it works. But let's try a more active scout. Okay, so we've seen passive spotting. Now let's see some active spotting. This is NL Jens, who's driving the Chinese Tier 10 light tank, the WZ1311. Now he's obviously very accomplished in this tank. He's got 2 marks of excellence on his barrel, and that's no easy accomplishment. They're on Prokhorovka, which is a nice spotting map, nice and light tank map. And you know, there's the proviso and all this sort of stuff. You do need to, you know, be aware that some maps are better for active and passive scouting than the others. This map is a very good passive scout map. It's also a very good active scout map, as we're going to see. The obvious place is to do what the Rheinmetall Panzer and the T100 LT are doing up on the one line and trying to get up to the E1 area and spot everything. Our friend Jens here, not doing the same thing at all. His first run was across the crest. He spotted a load of enemy tanks. He's now kind of pushing towards the hill, base of the hill, just lighting up stuff. And he's doing more of an intelligence run than anything else, because the chances of his team doing a huge amount of damage to those vehicles is pretty slim, but at least they know what's going up to the hill. Now, what's worrying for his team is not an awful lot of his team who's going for the hill. So, not so good. But rather than moan and bitch and cry, he's going to go and do his own job up there. So he said to the team, I go spot, wait a second. So he's telling his team, who are all sitting in the middle, waiting to be fed, saying, I'm going to go up here and spot what I can see. He's got support of an E5, and he knows that he can probably bail out if he absolutely has to. Heading towards the edge Going to do a drive-by on the edge here. There's an enemy scout. Has a go for him, and he spots the two, or is it three enemy tanks there? There's a Super Conqueror, and the beauty of this is he's in such low ground. It's really hard for them to hit him. Still lighting those guys up down there. 2,500 damage inflicted. They've got to clear him out because he's just going to wreck them if they don't. The IS-7 has recognised that and is pushing up. He's not firing. You can see he's not firing, but his buddy down there in the grilly is, because he just slapped that IS-7. And it does help when you've got platoon buddies who can help you, and you can say to them, just take down that guy, please, just help me out. And he's back again. Look at this. Just getting close enough to spot, just to show a little slither of his tank over the top. And it's the turret, which is the strongest bit of the tank, and that's all he needs to show. You don't have to get your gun over, you don't have to get your viewing ports over, you just have to get a slither of your tank spotting. Now even then he's being hit. And these are tier 8 guns, tier 10 guns, so when you get hit in a scout like this, whoa, look at that shot, just whizzed through. It's bounced a shot off the bounced off his turret, and it was the back of his turret as well. Now, you can't really afford to take too much more. But 8,400 assistance so far. So he's going to whiz back round. He's going to go for another run. Very happy with his work so far. He's saying 9,000 damage and assistance combined. Not quite on that, but it's nearly there. He just couldn't afford to stay up on that hill any longer because he'd take two big hits, and that's the key with this sort of active scouting. You know, when it gets too hot, just bail. You've got to get out. It's the same with the passive spotting, to be honest. You need to know when you're in danger and when you're not. Now he's been spotted immediately. He came over there, which means there's that enemy LT probably is just over there and just spotted him. Yeah, he said spotted by the T100. And there's the T100. Someone needs to take him down. Can he take him down? Oh, he bounces a shell, and luckily his grilly buddy takes him down. Right, that makes life a lot easier. Spotted the Badger. Oh, but he took a hit by the Studfagen 103B. Now he's in a bit of a quandary here, but he's in dead ground. He's in dead ground, which is a huge advantage. Very hard for them to hit him because he's such low silhouette. Look at that. All those tanks he drove past have all been spotted and having to bail out. The Badger's getting hit. The Studfagen is being hit. He spotted the Type 5 Heavy. Can have another go at it. Type 5 Heavy's taking hits. There's the Badger again. There's the Studfagen. And he's just doing enough. As soon as he pops up and they appear, he gets out of there. Because you can't afford. There's always a delay on 6th Sense going off. So even if you've got 6th Sense on your tank, you can't rely on it. You know that once you've been spotted, there's a bit of a delay before the 6th Sense icon comes up. Ooh, that grill could have had a piece of him there. Just driving around, using the mobility of the tank, using the stealthiness of the tank, basically to try and spot and keep moving. 13,000 assistance damage, all moving around. Badger there. Oh, he actually finally fires a shot and misses. they're closing in on the Badger, so he's leaving him to his teammates, because what's the point? And he's going after the Batch at 25 ton. Finally gets something to fire at. Nice shot into the Batch at. And that's it. He's down. There you go. That is how you actively spot. So there you go. That was actually got him his 3rd mark of excellence that game. Fantastic. So he's an accomplished scout, that's for sure. First class, spotter, and patrol duty. Finished up top of his team, of course, on base XP. 836 damage, 1089 base XP. Only fired 4 shots, 2 of which penetrated, and he got nearly 15,000 spotting damage, 14,840, 95,000 credits. Even using his consumables, got over 100,000 credits, and 2,500 assistance damage. What a good job that was. So some really good examples of gameplay, and you know, far better than I would certainly manage to achieve. Funny enough, I tried to play a few games to show you, but the thought of managing to talk and commentate and tell you what I was trying to say at the same time just defeated me entirely, and the games were largely rubbish. So I resorted to finding them in WOT replays, and those 2 replays are extreme versions of it. I mean, they are extreme exponents of the art of both passive and active scouting. But you know, you don't have to do 18 or 15,000 spotting in a tank. You can have your own little victories at different levels. So it's the technique that's important. So golden rules, Dom's golden rules for light tank play are as follows. Don't rush off and suicide. A light tank is extremely valuable to the team. It's a spotter, it's a scout, it's a clean up at aisle number 5. It's the tank that comes into its own later in the game. Check the composition of the enemy team. Look and see how many light tanks there are, particularly how many light tanks there are, how much artillery there is in the game. You know, if your team is largely composed of heavies, going off and being a passive scout, it's not really going to help, because all the heavies are going to be moving forward trying to fight at close range because they're not great snipers. If, however, your team's got a lot of TDs and a lot of artillery, then, you know, getting into a nice scouting passive position is a good option. But likewise, if the enemy team is full of light tanks and they're likely to be running around all over the place, chances of you getting safe into a bush and hiding are pretty slim. So you need to modify your activities accordingly, and maybe you have to be more adventurous and more aggressive. And if you get the opportunity to take down, so golden rule 3, if you get a chance to take down the enemy light tanks, do it. If you can blind the enemy team and give your team free view range and free view ability, then go for it, because there's a huge advantage of a team that has lights and a team that doesn't have lights. And nowadays, with the evening out of matchmaking, you don't get the games you used to in days gone by, when there used to be you know, 2 light tanks on one team and none on the other. Now they'll always be the same number. It's just the types and how good they are. So look at that, have a look, use XVM to see what the statistics are like on the other light tank drivers. If it's an extremely good light tank driver, then be careful, be very, very careful, unless you are an extremely good light tank player. Golden rule number 4, save your hit points. Don't go off. It's the same as suiciding. Try and maintain as much of your hit points as you possibly can for as long as you possibly can. Light tanks come into their own in the mid and late game. That's when the enemy team is fractured. Generally there's a few half-dead tanks around the place. They're not as compacted. They're focused on their own little fights. And then you can dive in and cause mayhem in a fast-moving, sometimes an auto-loading, but certainly a rapid-firing tank. Rule 5, is that where I'm up to? Yep. Look for an opportunity to go after the artillery. If the enemy has artillery, it's usually fairly obvious where they will be. So at some point in the game, look up and say, can I make a run for the artillery, and have a go for it. Sometimes just getting close enough to spot them is enough for your artillery to therefore counter barrage them. So go for the artillery when time is right. It's well worth it, and you will help your team out. So ultimately, I think light tanks are probably the highest skill cap vehicle in the game. As I say, I'm talking about from tier 5 upwards, particularly when you get into the higher tiers, tier 8s and tier 9s and even tier 10s. These things are very hard to play well, and if you play them like a heavy, or you try and play them like, well, a medium you can sometimes get away with, but if you try and play them like a heavy, you will lose. Do not go toe to toe with the heavies or the mediums or the lights. This is a sneaky, dirty tank. You need to fight on uneven terms. You need to get the enemy when they're looking the other way. You need to be the bully that smacks somebody around the back of the head when they're not looking your direction, then runs away before they can hit you. That's how you play with a light tank. You need to be very sure about what you're going to do and how you're going to play it. If it's a map that's possible to go passive scouting, and you've got a tank with really good camo, then go and passive scout. Also, when you're building your crews for your light tanks, pimp them out in the right way. So put camo on the crews wherever possible. Maximize the camo value of the tank. It can make a huge difference. If it's going to be a tank that you think is going to be a passive scout, more often than not, then think about putting binos and a camo net on it, because binos will help your view range. The camo net will also considerably help your camo values, particularly, well, only when you're stationary. If you're going to be more aggressive, if you think the tank is more of an aggressive thing or has extremely good base view range anyway, take a coated optics instead, because that will be more useful, and obviously coated optics only work when you are on the move. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. As I say, I'm not planning this series to be complete tutorial on different tanks and how to play them, but just the broad themes that you should be aware of if you're embarking on World of Tanks, or indeed have just started playing and not really sure about the different tactics and techniques of the different vehicles. There may only be 5 classes of vehicles in the game, but there is a considerable nuance and difference between even the tanks within them. So there's no hard and fast rule. However, they're very broad principles, and with the light tanks, it's either passive or active scouting are the two broad principles of and rules of thumb of the tank. So focus on tanks that do what you like to do and play them the way they're designed to play. That's your best way of getting the best results. And ultimately enjoy yourself. If you enjoy whizzing around causing mayhem in a light tank, but you know, don't do fantastically well, then hey, who am I to say? Enjoy yourselves, have fun. At the end of the day, it is just a game, and that's how it should be played. But bear in mind also, there's 14 other people who rely on you, more so than any other class in a light tank. They rely on you to help them to win the game, and just because you've run around like crazy and had a wonderful time but died within 2 minutes and feel very pleased with yourself, you've probably made everyone else, all the other 14 players on your team, not have such a good day. So be aware of that, be conscious of that, and you know, be logical, be sensible. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. In the meantime, enjoy your games, have fun, try not to take it too seriously, and I will see you again soon. This is Gamer Dom signing out.